I found the photo the day I emptied the last of my mother's boxes. It slipped from a faded leather diary onto my lap, sun-drenched, smug, utterly damning. My husband's mistress, smiling behind her sunglasses, standing at my mother's funeral. She wasn't standing with the mourners. She was in the back. Watching. She wore a sleek black dress. Same red lipstick. Same diamond pendant I'd seen once in my mother's wedding photos. Before the divorce, before my father left, before we stopped smiling in family pictures. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just stared. It was her. Carmen Vale. The woman who had torn my parents apart. My father's longtime mistress. The woman who had sent anonymous letters to my mother in the 90s, mocking her, threatening to take everything she had. I remembered those nights, Mom crying in the bathtub, whispering things she thought I didn't hear. And now, decades later, here she was again, this time smiling at my mother's grave, and now sleeping with my husband. History, rewritten with a crueler pen. I didn't confront him. Not right away. I watched. I replayed every late night, every business dinner, every cent that clung to his suit like evidence. And I realized what chilled me the most. My mother knew. She must have known. She must have realized Carmen had slithered back into my life. Why else keep that photo? Why tuck it into the very last page of the diary, dated 2 days before her death, circled with one word written in ink? Finish. I didn't cry. Instead, I poured myself a drink. Sat in the dark. And let something ancient settle in my chest, not rage, not despair. Purpose. The first time I saw her in person was at a charity gala my husband begged me not to attend. It's not your scene, he'd said. Boring speeches. Useless schmoozing. I told him I needed to get out of the house. What I didn't tell him was that I had already confirmed she'd be there, listed under her name, Carmen Vale, as a corporate donor. I wore my mother's black silk gloves and a dress that dared anyone to look away. Carmen arrived fashionably late, as always, with perfect posture and a mouth that never quite smiled. She moved through the room like she owned it. I watched her from the balcony bar, swirling champagne I had no intention of drinking. And there it was. My father's watch. Gold, vintage Patek Philippe, engraved on the back, "Time is proof, RB." My mother had shown it to me once when she still believed in love. Carmen had stolen it during the divorce, claimed he gave it to her. Maybe he had. Maybe he hadn't. But there it was now, gold on her wrist, glittering beneath the chandeliers like a dare. I didn't approach her. Not yet. Instead, I left early. I knew now how close she'd gotten. How comfortable. If she felt no shame flaunting the watch at a public event, then she believed she was untouchable. The thrill of transgression wasn't enough anymore. Carmen wanted legacy. Position. She was circling my husband's name like she had circled my father's before, rewriting the script, repositioning herself as irreplaceable. But I was no longer the child hiding in the hallway listening to my mother cry. I was a woman with access to every account my husband tried to hide, every real estate purchase tied to Carmen's name, every offshore transfer routed through shell companies he thought I wouldn't trace. I spent 2 weeks collecting passwords, IP addresses, property deeds. I found Carmen's investment property downtown, purchased with funds funneled through a fake consultancy contract. I found her brand new Jaguar registered under a name 1 letter off from mine. I even found a private email. Buried in encrypted messages, where my husband referred to her as the next chapter. He wasn't clever. And neither was she. I traced every transaction she touched. Every debt she'd refinanced through illicit gifts. She was reckless in ways my mother never had the luxury to be. And that's when I saw the opportunity. Not to expose. Not to scream. But to tighten the net. I contacted the bank holding the lien on her property. Quietly. Anonymously. Then I called a friend in collections. Within days, I bought the mortgage out from under her under a shell trust. She had no idea the home she was designing in gold and arrogance now belonged to me. The eviction date? Already circled. April 6th. The date of my mother's death. Let Carmen find out the same way my mother found out about her, in silence, with the floor crumbling beneath her. But first, I needed to see the look on her face. And for that, I needed to get closer. I invited her to lunch. Not as myself. She would have declined that in a heartbeat. No, I posed as Natalie Vance, an investor with an eye for boutique property in gentrifying neighborhoods. I used a voice softened by studied elegance and dressed in architectural white, the kind that whispers money and never apologizes. Carmen agreed within an hour. Her email was giddy. She thought I wanted to buy her house. We met at a corner table in a rooftop bistro, the kind where olive oil is served like wine and silence costs more than the food. She arrived wearing heels too high for daylight and perfume that stank of desperation masked as confidence. "Ms. Vance," she purred, extending a manicured hand. "I've heard so much about your acquisitions." I took it. Smiled. And played my part. For the next hour, she bragged. About her architect, her gallery wall, the walk-in wine cellar she planned to install once renovations finished. She never once mentioned my husband. Which meant she believed she had already won. That made her vulnerable. I asked to see the deed. Just for pre-approval formality, I lied. She handed it over with a shrug. She didn't recognize the name of the trust listed as lien holder. Of course she didn't. It was mine. Registered through a holding company under my mother's maiden name. It took me 3 months to build the structure, and another 6 weeks to reroute her lender's delinquent paperwork to a P.O. box I controlled. She hadn't made her last 2 payments, probably because my husband had tightened the purse strings, promising her something better in the near future. He hadn't told her he'd been flagged in an audit, that his firm had suspended his accounts pending investigation. She was living on a leash she didn't know had frayed. When she asked if I'd like to schedule a follow-up tour, I smiled. "Actually," I said, reaching into my bag and sliding a single folded letter across the table, "you're going to want to read this." She raised an eyebrow, unfolded the paper, and began to scan. Her expression didn't falter, yet. But then I saw it, the subtle narrowing of her eyes, the way her fingers froze halfway through the second paragraph. Notice of ownership transfer. Termination of occupancy agreement. Eviction scheduled for April 6th. She looked up. Finally. "What the hell is this?" "Legal documentation," I said, folding my napkin with care. "It's been processed, reviewed, and signed. That house no longer belongs to you." Her face cracked then, beautifully. "You don't know who you're messing with," she hissed. "Oh, I know exactly who you are," I said. "You're the woman who stood at my mother's funeral and smiled. The woman who stole her life and decided mine was next. But here's what you didn't know, Carmen, my mother died broke, not stupid. She left me the evidence. And now you're standing in the middle of a fire she lit." She stood, nearly knocking over her water glass. "You can't do this." I already did. People were watching now. Heads turned. She realized it too late. She picked up her bag, stumbled backward in her heels, and left without finishing her drink. I stayed seated. Let her retreat. It was never about humiliation. It was about legacy. 2 weeks later, the locksmith arrived at her house, my house, with police escort. I didn't show. I didn't need to. I had the deed. The law. The key. The next morning, my husband came home to an empty walk-in closet and a stack of printed emails, his, hers, and mine. Every transfer. Every lie. Every betrayal, laid out like a post-mortem. I didn't leave a note. I left him silence, and a severance agreement signed by a lawyer I'd retained 3 months earlier. He would lose his job, his house, and his mistress in 1 season. Spring was coming early. April 6th arrived dressed in irony, a perfect spring morning with blue skies and blossoms in the trees. The same kind of morning we'd buried my mother 5 years ago, when the sun mocked our grief and Carmen Vale had smiled at her grave like a queen laying claim. That day had broken something in me. Not just because my mother died, but because I realized she'd spent her final years knowing the woman who destroyed her marriage was circling mine like a vulture waiting to land. But today wasn't about mourning. It was about memory. At exactly 10 a.m., the sheriff's car pulled up to the gate of the 2-story Tudor-style house Carmen had called her sanctuary. She had poured herself into it, gut renovations, overpriced furniture, faux French accents, and gold-accented everything. It was the palace she'd built on my husband's promises. But those promises were now in foreclosure, and the land beneath her stilettos belonged to a trust she'd never bothered to question. She answered the door in a silk robe. The officer handed her the notice without a word. Her scream echoed halfway down the block. I watched it all from inside a parked car with tinted windows. My mother's old scarf knotted at my throat like a blessing. Carmen stood on the steps, yelling into her phone, demanding lawyers, calling names, threatening lawsuits. But no one came. Her name wasn't on the title. Her equity didn't exist. And the man she'd built her future on was too busy losing everything else to save her. I had waited for this, not for the spectacle, but for the silence that followed. When the door locked behind the sheriff, when the bags were left at the curb, when the birds chirped like nothing had changed. That was the sound I wanted. That was the sound of completion. But the house wasn't enough. I needed her to understand. 2 days later, she received a package, anonymous, of course. Inside was a framed photograph, Carmen Vale at my mother's funeral, the original one from the diary. Tucked behind it was the letter she'd written to my father in 1997. My mother had kept it. Carmen had signed it in red ink, the same shade she wore on her lips. You married the wrong woman, but I'll have what's mine. I let her have it. And then I took it all back. My husband, now ex, sent a single text, "You ruined us." I never responded. What could I say? You ruined yourself when you brought a ghost back into my house. He didn't know the kind of woman I had become. I was raised by a mother who endured humiliation with grace, and passed that steel into my bones. I was not the type to slap, scream, or beg. I was the kind to wait. To watch. To own. The day Carmen left the city, tail tucked and reputation in shreds, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in over a year. I brought no flowers. Just one thing. The keys. To the house. To the revenge. To the legacy she'd begun, and I'd finished. I laid them gently on the soil and whispered 2 words I hadn't dared speak since I opened that diary: "We're even." I didn't move into the house right away. At first, it felt like a stage still echoing with the last act. Her perfume lingered faintly on the velvet drapes. A red heel forgotten under the master bed. Receipts from overpriced brunches stuffed in drawers. The detritus of a woman who believed she would never be removed. I didn't throw anything away. I boxed it all, methodically, unceremoniously. Each item labeled, "Unkept promises." Borrowed time. Someone else's ending. Then I had the place gutted. Walls came down. Floors were sanded raw. The gilded mirrors replaced with clean-lined steel. I made the kitchen smaller and the study larger, because I liked silence more than show. And in the center of the living room where she had hung a chandelier shaped like a crown, I installed a single pendant light, unremarkable but honest. When it was done, I moved in. Alone. I painted the front door the same shade of teal my mother once chose for our family home, the house Carmen helped destroy. This house, now, was hers in name but mine in design. A space she built for conquest, repurposed for remembrance. I planted rosemary outside the kitchen window because my mother once told me it was for memory. And every morning, I opened the window and let it fill the house. People started to forget Carmen. Her name stopped appearing at fundraisers. Her business folded. She left no trace but dead and whispers, like a bad storm that passed in the night. My ex-husband tried to reappear in my inbox months later. "I never meant to hurt you," he wrote. I archived the message without opening it. He had confused intention with impact. Like so many men before him. There was no trial. No restraining orders. No tabloid drama. Just the slow, legal absorption of every lie until there was nothing left for them to stand on. My mother would have smiled at that. Sometimes I sat in the library with her diary in my lap, tracing the final page where she had written that one word, "finish." I imagined her writing it, not with malice, but with fatigue. A mother's wish that her daughter wouldn't inherit her silence. She didn't want me to become her. But she also didn't want me to forget. I didn't. I took her pain and gave it form. I took her absence and turned it into presence. And I did it the way she would have, with poise, intelligence, and finality. One night, just before summer, I opened a bottle of wine alone in the house. No guests. No parties. Just music echoing through reclaimed rooms. I walked barefoot on the hardwood floor, each step deliberate. I wasn't lonely. I was complete. This house wasn't a victory. It was a burial. Not for her. For them. Are drawn to revenge served like wine, aged, potent, and unforgettable? Subscribe now. There are more ghosts to silence, more stories to finish.